Hey there, I know what you're thinking. There's already a boatload of videos on this site about pushing HP5, but in my Hilton Head Island video, a former version of me that didn't know how to maintain a mustache said this.
I understand why it's a staple for so many people given its price, but when you shoot it at its native 400 ISO, it produces a disappointing amount of contrast. All the images you've seen here have had their contrast tweaked in post. When I shoot this film in the future, I'll probably push it 1 or 2 stops, because that seems to be what all the cool kids are doing.
And just as the prophecy foretold, I found myself itching for some HP5 again, so you bet your firstborn son I was going to be pushing it. I settled on 2 stops because go big or go home, right? For those of you who are unaware, HP5 Plus is a 400-speed black and white film from Ilford. It is of course named after the 5 or more layers of the iconic British brown sauce that make up the layers of its emulsion. Alternatively, if you're a conspiracy theorist, HP stands for hypersensitive panchromatic, meaning it's sensitive to all wavelengths of visible light. The 5 Plus indicates that it's obviously the 7th iteration of the film since it was first introduced in 1939. I know counting is difficult, Ilford, just ask Valve. HP5 is known for its ability to be push-processed, but what does that really mean and why would someone do it? The short and kind of hand-wavy answer is that push processing is underexposing the film in camera and then overdeveloping it during processing. This results in increased contrast and stronger grain, and is very popular among black and white films. You can do it with color film too, but you run the risk of some strange color casts depending on how far you push it. The way this is practically done is by setting your meter the required number of stops faster, causing you to underexpose your film. Then you tell your lab how many stops you want it pushed so that they can get the corrected development times from the manufacturer. This generally costs extra because it's more work for your lab. It's also worth noting that you can't just push 1 or 2 frames, it has to be the whole roll or none at all. This explanation always seemed a little incomplete to me because it doesn't address how the extra contrast is created through the process. So I set out to do some research by buying a real physical book from a real physical bookstore. Crazy, I know. It's the 35mm handbook by Michael Freeman, and this is the original version from 1980. This particular block of text in the section about the zone system was, I think, my aha moment. Freeman discusses push and pull processing as a way to increase or decrease contrast respectively, but never uses the actual terms pushing or pulling. I don't know if the terms had yet to be coined or just weren't popular at the time, but that's a question better left to your local etymologist. So with a little bit of knowledge and far too much unwarranted confidence, here's my attempt to explain how pushing film actually creates contrast. First off, it's not really contrast that we're trying to alter here, because a film can't get any darker or lighter than it already is. It's that we want the dark areas to go to black faster and the light areas to go to white faster. So it's like we're trying to bake an S-curve into the film. We're going to use the visual from the zone system, plus or minus 5 stops from middle gray. Now, I can already hear you saying, "Hold your horses there, partner. Don't most negative films have 13 or 14 stops of dynamic range?" And yeah, you're right, but most of that extra range is up here at the top end. And when you print or display an image, the best you can really do is 9, maybe 10 stops between full black and full white. So I think the zone system is more than fair for use in this explanation. Oh, and I'm going to be mentioning middle gray a lot. That's just this guy right here. It's called middle gray because it's, well, in the middle. It's perceptually halfway between black and white. Every other tone is just middle gray plus or minus some amount of stops, so that's why I'll be using it heavily in the following explanation. When you shoot film normally, you set your meter to the ISO on the box, you shoot your scene, and then you get it developed based on the manufacturer's developing times. And your images come out with the standard amount of contrast for that film. So for HP5 Plus, your meter is at 400 ISO. You get it developed for 9 minutes, and all is right with the world, albeit a little bit flat for my liking. But now you want to push HP5 2 stops. So you set your meter to 1600 ISO, and then your whole roll is underexposed by 2 stops. If you develop it normally, the image will look pretty dark because middle gray didn't get enough light to render as middle gray in the normal development times. But fear not, once we apply the second step of the push processing process, by adjusting the development time to 13 minutes, we allow middle gray to gather enough density to render as middle gray on the negative. The sliding back and forth of this tonal window, coupled with the probabilistic nature of chemical development, is what gives us this S-curve effect. Remember that all the extra information in the film is up here at the top end, so very little information below zone 1 is going to be recorded. The film simply isn't sensitive enough. So when we add development time to shift the tonal window back into place, all of these zones down here won't have any information in them, so they won't develop any density during development, and then will render as black, creating the bottom of the S-curve. This is also where a common misconception about pushing film comes in. Just because you set your meter to a higher ISO doesn't mean that the film can magically start to see in the dark. It just means that the dark areas will go to black faster because all of this information was never recorded. Push processing makes the bright areas go to white faster because of how chemistry is about probability and time. If you leave the film in the forbidden development soup long enough, eventually all of the silver halide crystals in the emulsion will be developed into metallic silver, and then there will be no difference in density between the light and the dark areas, so no image will form. But when we take a picture, we're causing the silver halide crystals exposed to light to change into a state where they are much more likely to develop quickly. Because film works by collecting light and its ability to retain more information in the top end, when we underexpose the film, there's still adequate light to record an image up here. But a negative can only get so dense. So during the extended development time, these areas hit the density ceiling and tonal variation is lost, creating the top end of the S-curve. And the increased development time is also where I think the increased grain comes from, as more crystals all over the film have a greater chance of being spontaneously developed. So to recap, the sliding back and forth of the tone window, coupled with the probabilistic nature of chemical development, is how push processing actually creates contrast. So now that I just spent 1,100 words explaining the mechanics of push processing, how does it actually look when used on HP5? To set the scene, I was on a company-mandated outing to Spartanburg, South Carolina. Apparently, I only yearn for HP5 when I'm in the Palmetto State for some reason. File that under things that make you go, I had some time to kill while waiting for some friends to have dinner with, so I whipped out the Minolta in a parking deck and shot a few frames. Already, the contrast on these shots is right where I want them, even at night, which is crazy. So I'm killing time in a parking garage, and I've never shot 1600 ISO film before. It's very weird to be hand-holding a camera at night. I'm shooting like a 60th at f2, which just feels super wrong, especially when it's this dark. Sunrise just doesn't hit the same in black and white. After a long day working, I took the opportunity to go out and shoot the HP5 with reckless abandon. Big fan of the spray and pray method. We were lucky enough to finish our dinner just as the local Christmas parade was getting underway. And yes, that is the Denny's World Headquarters, in case you were wondering. The next day, we didn't have to be on site till the early afternoon, so I spent the morning in a coffee shop, and I think this is where I really started to hit my stride. Turns out, stimulants increase performance. Who would have thought? The last time I was in Spartanburg, I shot this same sign on Fuji C200, but I liked it better in black and white, so it felt good to go back and do it for real this time. This spot's kind of weird because they have a classic Krispy Kreme on one side of the road and a new Krispy Kreme on the other. Clearly they're in no rush to do anything with the old one because I've been coming here for a couple of years and it's just been sitting there the whole time. I just wish they'd actually use the neon sign at night. It was our last evening in town and I still had a couple of shots to burn, so I turned to the hotel for inspiration. Honestly, not bad. So is HP5 push 2 stops bussin' or not bussin'? Obviously it's bussin'. On God, for real, for real. Composition wise, the first half of this roll is nothing special, but by the second half I felt pretty locked in. This one, I think, might even find its way into the portfolio. The contrast is the real star of the show, though. It's exactly where I want it without any adjustments. There's only one photo on the whole roll that I might say had maybe a little too much contrast, but I still think it works. So on your next roll of HP5 Plus, consider pushing it 2 stops if you like contrast and grain. Just don't be mad when your lab charges you an extra few dollars for it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go animate all of the graphics I have planned for the beginning of this video. Hopefully you like them. Consider watching another one of my videos if you have the time. YouTube really likes that. Maybe even leave a like or a comment. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Quality production assistant right here.